working both graders who were college bound, but maybe not college ready. And so they had significant difficulties with reading and writing, but had aspirations to go to college. And so my job was to get them ready for the next step. And so I learned so much during that time. But one of the things that I love to share with people, especially if you're working at a high school or at a middle school, or if you have a English teaching background yourself, our educator preparation program. Mine was wonderful at Murray State. I learned so much, but I did not learn a lot about how the brain learns to read. I always love to tell the joke that I took a class called, I don't think I'm sharing my screen. I just realized, no, I am. Um, I took a class called Literature of the Habsburg Empire, which you may have taken a really similar course that was so interesting and fascinating, but did not serve to support struggling readers. So that's kind of the challenge that we face is not only do we have students who we know have significant difficulties in middle and high school with their reading and their writing, but then we also have teachers who may not have the declarative knowledge that they need to be able to support students the best way that they can. So that's what we're going to get into today and how in Kentucky we're trying to change that narrative. So I'm sure you are very aware that early literacy is currently a priority in Kentucky. The Read to Succeed Act was known as Senate Bill 9 back in 2022, is now in law in the Kentucky Reading Academies. So if you don't know much about that, I invite you to click this link. Leigh may drop a link in the chat. She has a host of links to send to you. And you can also access these slides. But if you're not sure what we're talking about when we say letters or the Kentucky Reading Academies, it is a massive project. I would invite you to read more or attend some of those sessions today about early literacy. And so this is now widely known that there's so much research that supports the third grade proficiency is so important. And you can see all of the research that's been tied back to third grade proficiency. You can see also across several years, we know that K-Prep changed to KSA. We obviously saw a dip after the COVID closures, but certainly we are working so hard to improve third grade literacy in Kentucky while we know that adolescents, and again, I'm not going to belabor this data because I think we're all aware of where our students are, particularly those marginalized subgroups. But I did just want to point out that more than half of our eighth graders are reading below proficient, along with more than half of our 10th graders. And so I don't think anybody on this call is okay with that. I think we're all aware of the problem and the issue that we're facing. And so let's talk about some of those solutions, either at the building level or at the state level that we're thinking about. So if you've heard of the National Reading Panel report, this is old research, now 24 years old. If you've heard of those big five, would you mind just to tell me in the chat? You can just say, yes, I've heard of it, or I'm familiar. If you've heard of the big five that are on the screen right now, let us know in the chat. Certainly, these are things that are being talked about far and wide in our elementary classrooms, but it may not be as widely known. So these are the 5 skills that have been shown by a massive team of researchers. This document is like 300 pages long, and it says this is what it takes to support a child to learn to read. But are they the same for our middle and high school readers? And the answer is no. Of course, we do have students in middle and high school who may have gaps in their phonemic awareness and phonics. However, for our middle and high school students, there's another report not as widely known that came out just 6 years after that big famous report, the National Reading Panel. And it basically is the same. Notice that fluency, vocab, and comprehension are all there. However, for our middle and high school students, it's not so much about phonemic awareness. It's the advanced decoding, particularly of our multisyllabic words with multiple syllables. And instead of focusing on phonics, again, I hope no one hears us suggesting that middle and high school students need to do phonics. And again, in some cases, they may need that. However, we're saying that morphology, which is, if you're not familiar with that word, we're about to test our knowledge a little bit. Notice that comprehension is still there. Nobody's saying that comprehension does not matter. That is certainly still the goal. So, little activity for us. If you have a scrap piece of paper in front of you, I'm going to ask that you this is just for your eyes. I'm not going to see it. No one else is going to see it unless you just leave it on your desk. Let people know, but you're going to number your paper 1 through 5. And I'd like to give you just a few moments to see if you can match these components with their definition. So take just about 60 seconds. See if you can match these components of adolescent literacy with their meaning. All right, let's check our work for the sake of time. First up, advanced decoding, you should have gotten D. That translating from print to translating a word from print, usually by employing knowledge of sound and symbol. That's often what we call phonics. Morphology, the study of breaking words into parts. So just a morpheme is just a part of a word that still carries meaning. And so breaking those words into parts, research says is essential for our adolescent readers. Fluency, reading accurately and smoothly. Vocabulary should have gotten B, knowledge of and memory for word meanings. And then comprehension is, of course, extracting or constructing meaning. So we want to build that knowledge among our teachers, our administrators, our leaders across Kentucky. And one of the ways that we're doing that is by the use of a free guide. If you've heard of the IES practice guides before, you know that these are excellent resources. And that's what my professional learning is entirely built around. This one right here, providing reading interventions for students in grades 4 through 9. So I've basically put up all, if you're not familiar with these IES practice guides, essentially what they do is they take a ton of research, ESSA level 1 and 2, if you're using those ESSA level articles in your school. This is all very high quality, strong evidence to support all of these strategies, and it basically makes recommendations. And so we've translated that into professional learning for 6 sessions across 6 months. We offer ELA credit and PD credit. We have about 7 districts that are offering stipends. And so you can see the sessions starting with session 2 all the way to session 6. Those are coming straight out of that IES guide that I just referenced. Whereas the first session was some of that theoretical work. So if you've heard of Scarborough's rope, the simple view of reading, that's what that first session was all about, building some of that foundational declarative knowledge of how the brain learns to read, since that's something that I didn't access until graduate school. It's not something that I knew when I was an English teacher and was trying to work with my students. I did not have a concept of that. And so we're trying to build not just knowledge of strategies, but also knowledge of reading. And again, not just for interventionists, not for elementary teachers, but for all teachers in 6 through 12. So I do want to say that you can still join this cohort. One of the ways, and I'll show you some more specific ways to do it. If you just never heard about this, didn't know it was happening, we have ways for you to get involved. We have all of the session recordings from the first 2 sessions. You can access it here with our learning plan. Or if you know that right now is not the right time for you to get involved with this, but you just want to look at the resources, I update this regularly. We have everything posted up through session 3. And so you are free to access that. Again, you can also contact me and say, hey, can I jump on to the session next week? I would love to have you. One thing I do want to point out is this is all about strengthening Tier 1 instruction. We know that many of our students need interventions in middle and high school. However, the goal of this session is to use these strategies that we're learning about to make it accessible across the curriculum, that all students are accessing those grade level complex texts with strong evidence-based strategies in Tier 1. Okay, so just a quick preview. This is from session 2. I mentioned morphology and multisyllabic words. As mentioned, our IES practice guide, you can see it down there in the corner. It provides this whole list of activities for building automaticity or for students to recognize words automatically when reading. And so in a session, a typical session, we talk through, hey, what does the research say? And then we actually practice those sessions. Or practice those strategies. And so we do ground all of our sessions in HQIRs. If those are new letters for you, HQIR stands for High Quality Instructional Resource. That have something that has been vetted and green rated by edreports.org. And so that's essentially what we point our participants to. But this is a grade level 7th grade text. And then what we were able to do during the session is think about ways that we might get students to engage with the words that the student might encounter in that text. So in the session, we do things like the sort that you see here. We talk about annotations, finding the prefixes and suffixes. We talk about reading in context during partner work just to make chunk text to make it more accessible. If a student is struggling at the word level, we talk about so many different ways for all different kinds of learners to access this. One thing that I failed to mention is we know many of our students are multilingual learners. And so even if a teacher is not a full multilingual learner instructor, these are still strategies that can support those students particularly. I know often I did not receive a ton of training back when I was in college on how to support those learners. And so again, we want to make sure that we're mindful of ways we can support those students as well. As mentioned, coming up next week, we've got our session on fluency. Just reading. Okay, it looks like he's modifying the schedule. So that's good. If you have questions, we'll have plenty of time. So as mentioned, you are free to jump onto this session next week. Again, I'd like to know that you're there. So you could certainly email me if you're intending to do that. However, we try to keep it pretty flexible for people because we know that there's a high need for this right now across the state. So next week, we're going to be working with some pretty complex texts. Again, the whole goal of this is to strengthen Tier 1. None of our recommendations suggest giving students texts that aren't grade level. So we want students to continue engaging with those complex texts. We are all very educated folks on this call. I imagine many of us, if not most of us, are proficient readers. We would struggle with these texts because they are really challenging. They're archaic. They often talk about topics that are either figurative in nature. If you're familiar with Animal Farm, it is about animals, but it is not about animals, right? It's about communism. And so these are challenging texts for even adult readers. And so next week, we're going to be talking about how to engage students with these high Lexile level texts and to read them fluently. So again, some example strategies. This one is another partnered reading, which can be very powerful for adolescent folks to come together around a text. We also talk about choral reading, which we often don't think about as being a tool for our middle and high schools. But I found that my students respond very well to this. This is where we practice emphasis, which is part of prosody. Prosody just means reading with the correct intonation that shows that a reader is fluent. And then another way to break into that is to practice saying the same word a bunch of different ways and then slowly building this kind of routine into the text. You may be familiar with Macbeth and recognize this quote. This is what Macbeth is saying. No, we're not going to kill the king, Lady Macbeth. So again, we want students to engage with those complex texts. That's what this cohort is all about, and giving teachers the tools so that they feel comfortable helping those students who are really struggling to change that narrative for them. So you may have adopted a high quality instructional resource in your building, or your district may be working on that. And so I just wanted to point you all to the consumer guide, and the consumer guide will essentially point you to edreports.org. EdReports is a nonprofit that releases free reports about published resources. Again, they call them materials. In Kentucky, we call them resources. But I would encourage you, if you're still in the adoption process, to take a look at that consumer guide. Again, the KDE does not necessarily make recommendations. That's not something we're able to do. However, we can point you to this consumer guide. Again, you may have a high quality resource in place, or you may be realizing, what in the world am I going to do for my struggling readers? And so I did want to point you to some resources on our MTSS website. I'm not the MTSS specialist. My specialty is secondary reading and writing. However, we are in the same office as our MTSS coordinator for the state. And so I would be happy to point you to her if you'd like to talk through what that would look like. Again, I am focused on strengthening Tier 1. However, if you know that there are needs for Tier 2 and Tier 3, or if your district is considering, we're happy to provide technical assistance. And again, some guidance, however, not able to make recommendations. Some other resources I want to point you to, if you're just personally curious, how much do I know about adolescent literacy? I know that you're trying to build your capacity as a leader, and principals have so many roles in their buildings. It's hard sometimes to think about some of that academic leadership. I know how challenging that is. And so if you just want to see what you know, we have included this pre-assessment. It's 30 multiple choice questions. You'll see your score out of 30, but I will not. I won't look and say, oh, so-and-so from Bullitt County took this quiz. I've taken that column off, so I have no idea whose name is whose. This is really just for the good of the Commonwealth, for folks to see how much they know. If you do get a question wrong, many of them explain why you got it wrong. And you're also always free to reach out to me with questions about that. Some other links, as mentioned, I've linked the learning plan, so it tells you exactly what we're doing in each of those sessions, even if you're never able to join, but you're thinking about some PL for the folks at your district or in your co-op. You can see how, again, this is built out 6 sessions over 6 months. And you can think about what that might look like in your building, or if you know teachers who would be interested in looking at some of this independently, please feel free to pass it on to them. And then finally, I've included the IES practice guide. I love that Jimmy Casas just said, no anonymous feedback forms. This one's not anonymous. And also, I'm not your principal. This is more for you to report to us how we can best support you. Again, we are doing everything that we can to make sure that principals and teachers and leaders, our whole educator team across the state, has what they need to support our adolescent readers. And so if you have questions or you have thoughts, or if you have specific things, this is a way to report to us some of those things. Or again, you can reach out to me directly. I've also included a free article. This just came out last week, and it is an excellent piece out of Boston. And I've included the free PDF version for you guys. Some of the pictures are pixelated, but that's what we get for me taking something that was behind a paywall and giving it to you. But I wanted you to be able to access it. We know that there are strong implications, both emotionally, socially, behaviorally, for our students who struggle with reading. It is very challenging to enjoy school. It's very challenging to navigate the world. Although many of them are very smart and are survivors, right? They found ways to exist in the world, despite their lack of ability in reading, and have found ways to compensate through other skills. And so I just want to, this article, I just wanted to highlight it because it does a wonderful job talking about how all facets of life are impacted for teenagers who struggle with reading. I thought you might like passing that on to your school-based teams. So again, I want to invite you to join the cohort if that's something that appeals to you. You certainly can just access the learning plan if it's not the right time. The Read to Succeed conference, you may have heard that that's coming up, and we often associate the Read to Succeed Act with K through 3. However, this conference is going to have 4 sessions for secondary folks, and it is absolutely free in Lexington this summer. More information will come soon, but I just want to ask you to mark your calendars for that. You can have an in-person learning opportunity, and teachers, principals, admin, everyone's invited. And then if you're like, how did I not hear about this adolescent literacy cohort? The way that our office gets information out is through the Standards newsletter, and I would invite you to subscribe there. So at this point, we have some time for questions. By my timer, we've got about 9 minutes, which is wonderful. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can look you in the eyeballs if necessary. But at this time, I'd like to hear if there are questions, comments about what's presented.
I absolutely loved that you shared the link with like that last PDF link that you shared about the literacy and even text messaging, because you hit it on the head right there. Like, it is, these kiddos, they really often have struggles with that. And I don't know why the decline in it has taken place. I don't know if maybe due to COVID, where they were out that couple of years, but you really honestly have noticed such a decline in all of it. So I appreciate you sharing that, especially that last link. But I have a whole running Google Doc with all of your links that you shared. So I think it's all been good. Thank you so much.
Yes, Jessica, reach out anytime. And again, if you have teachers who you think would like to participate in the cohort, feel free to pass it on to them. Or if you think that there would be a need for upcoming, let us know that as well.
Okay, that would be great. I have your schedule too. I'm definitely looking there. I know the last 2 sessions that you had offered, that you have offered on that with your cohort, I'm very, very interested in those. But I have your email too, so I'm going to try to stay in touch and kind of circle back around with you on those.
Yeah, please do. Please do. Holly, I see you're off mute. I can't hear you though.
Do you ever come to the schools for like embedded professional development days?
Great question. That's not something I'm able to offer as a consultant. However, we're in communication with both the with some of our cooperatives about what this might look like. And of course, happy to share any materials that people want to adapt to use at the local level. And so stay tuned on that, Holly. Just
Okay.
that feedback is helpful. It shows us and shows our leadership that people are really in need of this. So just asking that is helpful. All right, we'll give you some time then. Chrissy, were you going to say something?
I was just going to share, I put the link to the feedback form and just to remind people to complete those for each session you go to.
Yes, that's helpful feedback to us. Well, again, I feel like I've exhausted my wait time, and I know you have so many resources to read through. And so I trust that you'll reach out to me if there's anything that I might do for you or for your teachers or for your students. Very passionate about supporting this work for our 6th through 12th grade educators as well as their students. So again, all of those resources are available. Please feel free to email me at any time should you have a specific request. Thank you all for being here today.
Thank you, Kristen and Leigh. Great job. Very informative. Loved all the resources.